Blog Talk Radio.
Well, I can't this Sunday. I'm playing golf, and the following Sunday I promised to take the kids to the beach. Man's got to spend some time with his kids, you know.
Yeah, sure.
Besides, we seem to get along just fine without church. You know, it's up to the individual. Gee, look at the time. I got to run. But anyhow, we'll trot along to church one of these days.
Well, how about 2 weeks from Sunday?
Oh, I never planned that for 2 weeks. The whole world could blow up by then.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's Thursday, April 1st. And it's actually a almost sunny day here in Massachusetts, April Fool's Day, although the topic of today's show, Bullies in Your Backyard Too, Bully-Proofing Your Life, is certainly no joke to the many kids who have to go through it. And today I'm pleased to be able to have on a wonderful expert, Dr. Joel Haber, the bully coach, who's going to help us turn the situation around from being something that paralyzes a lot of families to a situation that hopefully will help people feel more empowered and a little bit more proactive about what to do. I know, having gone through bullying situations with my own kids, it can be really challenging to sort out when do you intervene, when do you call the school, do you call the parents, should you not call the other parents? I know these are incredibly tough issues, and there are no easy answers. Whenever I've talked to my kids' school about the issue, I have to say the biggest challenge is getting the schools to say the word bullying. And I'm curious if anybody has any thoughts about that. If you're listening by phone or Skype or on the computer, shoot me a message today, tomorrow, or anytime you happen to be listening by the archive, and let me know what your experience is. You can email me at ideas@pediatricsnow.com. You can Twitter me at Dr. Gwen, DRGWENN. You can leave me a note through Blog Talk Radio, which is blogtalkradio.com/Dr. Gwen. Number of ways of reaching me, but I'd love to know if you've ever had the experience of having trouble getting your school to say the word bully. I know that it's like any problem. If you have a problem with gambling or alcohol or drugs, or you're an addictive shopper, or you yell too much, or any problem in life, we tell our kids that the first step is acknowledging you have the problem. I think schools have a problem saying the word bully. They don't want to label kids, or they think they're being mean to do it. I actually think, and we'll find out what Dr. Haber thinks when he calls in, that the biggest step towards solving the problem and helping kids get over it is to actually name it. If you're the victim and you've been bullied and you're feeling miserable and you're getting stomach aches and headaches and not focusing and not doing well in school and feeling ostracized, part of the reason you're feeling that way is you're feeling victimized. So if you know people believe you, and they're willing to say that child bullied you, you start to feel stronger, your body starts to heal, and you'll be able to get over it quicker. But if they're not willing to use the term bully, I think that we can't heal. Same with the kid who's being the bully. If they're not labeled as being a bully, they don't really see what they're doing wrong. They think they're just being a mean kid, or maybe they think they're not really going to get into trouble. So I think that that is a big issue. Some people wonder what the health problems are that kids who are bullied experience. And I can, while I'm waiting for Dr. Haber to call in, let me just go through a few. In terms of the psychological issues of bullying, there are a lot. We'll go into this more with Dr. Haber, but the issues kids experience can be anything from just feeling uncomfortable to true anxiety and depression. Bullying can be incredibly intense on kids. I've seen some kids who just will avoid school altogether. They'll develop some serious phobias about the setting where the bullying occurred, especially if it's in school. From physical health problems, I've seen migraines, headaches, ulcers, just stomach aches and upset problems. I've even seen some other neurologic problems, where kids will start getting tics and other sorts of things. It can really impact a child. Kids can have trouble focusing. They can start becoming really irritable and just sort of, some will describe it as not being themselves. So you can imagine all the different range of emotions that sort of come out. Think about the worst anxiety you've had in your life and how it makes your body feel crummy. Kids get those feelings, and it translates into physical symptoms. I see Dr. Haber on the line. Let me give you a little bit of information about him, and then we'll bring him right on. So Joel, don't hang up. I'm about to introduce you and bring you on. Joel is a clinical psychologist, and he has spent his entire practice, 20 years in practice, looking into ways to prevent bullying and reduce it throughout childhood. He works with schools and camps, sports groups, homes, and workplace. If there's a form of bullying that's out there, he's looked into ways to help address it. He's a founder of a group called Respect You SM program, and he's authored a number of articles. He goes around the country speaking on this. And if you go to his website, respectyou.com, you can learn a lot more about his programs. He's affiliated with the National Register of Psychology and the American Psychological Association. He's been on TV, every place from CBS to CNN, NPR, ESPN radio. If you're interested in what he says, you can find a great book that he wrote called Bully-Proofing Your Child's Life and Protect Your Child from Teasing, Taunting, and Bullying for Good. And I think you're going to find what he has to say incredibly practical. So let me bring him on, and we will start our discussion. This is always the hard part, bringing somebody on the air without disconnecting them. Hi, Joel. How are you?
Fine. How are you? Thanks for having me.
I'm doing well.
Great.
Nothing too much. Enjoying the lack of rain here in Massachusetts for a change.
Same here in New York. It's a nice day.
Yeah, it's nice to be not underwater, which is a good thing. Well, thanks for joining today. This is a huge issue in Massachusetts, as it is all over the country, and I think people are looking for some practical solutions, especially when their kid has been teased or bullied and they go to the school who basically looks at them like, are you sure? And they don't want to deal with it. So what do you tell parents?
Well, I think the important thing first is to find out what the story really is from your child, because many times kids come home with emotional stuff going on and they talk about it and then they get over it. But in bullying situations, the effects of that can be really more painful, and they last and they linger. You have to look for signs that your kid's situation is really troubling to them. And if that's the case, depending on your kid's age, you really want to talk to them about whether or not they need help to try to fix this themselves, because kids are really reluctant sometimes to have you contact the school if they feel like they want to work it out on their own first. If they're bullying severe, we always have you contact the school, or if it's problematic enough that you're concerned. But you have to do that with the school in a way that's confidential, and you have to get assurances that the school will keep your information confidential, because otherwise your kid risks further bullying, and that's what they're most afraid of.
So what are some of the biggest, you mentioned the confidentiality, so a big pitfall schools make is probably to go and essentially rat the kid out by disclosing too much up front, I would think. Yeah,
the biggest problem here in many ways is that kids are so afraid of being ratted out by other kids or by their parents or even a teacher, if they tell, that they're going to feel more ashamed and actually set themselves up for more bullying. So schools who do this well actually never rat out a kid. They talk about, information they get from a number of different sources. They never let go of who that kid was who may have told someone else, which is actually a helpful thing to do. They really try to protect a kid's confidentiality so the kid isn't targeted further. And that's something that schools need to pay attention to, or they're never going to get the information they need from other students.
What do you suggest if a bully is targeting a child and the bully has figured out that the child has ratted him out? So it's already out there. Maybe the school thought they were doing the right thing by coming clean and saying, look, we know you're picking on this kid, stop.
Yeah, and if they do that, the school, if they do it right again, can say, we've heard from many different people and we've observed ourselves what's been happening here. So the bully doesn't think it's from that one kid. But if the bully does think it's from that one kid, the school can actually, in their own way, quietly, carefully, put teachers on this kid, have aides watch this kid, have adults watch the kid who's doing the bullying carefully from shorter distances in the places that bullying most likely occurs, like in the hallway, during recess, lunchroom, so that there's always someone close enough to keep an eye and an ear on the situation to make sure this kid who's doing the bullying is not putting himself into a situation where he can be harmful to others. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. One of the complaints I hear from parents and kids a lot is they don't feel schools either have the power or do enough once a bully is caught to reprimand the bully or discipline. I've heard kids who are bullied say, well, why can't they just suspend the kid or kick him out of school, or, why is the kid still here? How do you respond to that? What is the appropriate way to, while you're protecting the child, also deal with the bully so that, while the bully is still functioning at school, there is, the appropriate discipline? Each school system has its own way of disciplining these kids. There's also laws in place in different jurisdictions, but that is a good point that some kids make, that they see a lot of talk. They don't see a lot of action in some school communities.
Well, you're right, and part of the problem is that schools many times don't know what to do, because here's the problem. Bullies are actually sometimes kids who are different than who we think they are. Like sometimes they're the popular kids, the kids who are, smart, connected, good self-esteem, they get along with others, teachers like them, they're unsuspected. So even when they sometimes maybe commit bullying, and a lot of kids try out bullying behavior in their lives, it's not unusual, maybe they get a free pass. Or schools sometimes do discipline, like you said, differently, because some schools may call bullying something and then discipline one way and not have it done another way, and parents are confused about this. The reality is that kids who bully consistently don't necessarily respond well to consequences at first. It may make them more angry, and they may actually increase their bullying in more surreptitious ways. But what works with bullying kids is what we call reflection. And what that means is, when a bullying kid does something or they're caught, a lot of times they've learned to deny it or blame it on the other kid. And, it's really hard to pin it unless someone's really seen them do it, live, or they have documentation of it in a real way. What we try to get bully kids to do is own their behavior, and when we have a meeting with a bullying kid, we say to them, look, we found out from a number of different sources, blah, 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 or from someone else that you've been doing some stuff. I want to know what happened in this situation, and I don't care about what the other person did yet. I'll talk to them later. Tell me in your own words, start with the word I, tell me what you did to cause you to be sitting in my office right now. And your goal is to get them to own the behavior that crossed the line and cross school rules. Because once they own it and they can see that they did something that was inappropriate and crossed the line, then you can work on problem solving, consequences, or lay out a plan so that they don't do it again. But they first have to acknowledge that they did it, or consequences are almost meaningless at first.
Interesting. So that part may be easy if you can get the kid into the office and at least get them one-on-one to get that far.
Well, you have to try to get them to own their behavior, or basically there's going to be a lot of denial. And that's really one of the biggest problems, is that they'll claim the other kid did it or whatever. There's a lot of back and forth. But in a bullying situation, bullies are responsible, obviously, for committing some harm to someone else. But they have to see it if you're really trying to make a real change. I mean, a lot of times schools take the notion of, let's just give them consequences. Well, consequences, again, can be helpful initially, and sometimes kids get a warning at first. Sometimes they lose an activity, they lose recess, they, can be taken out of fun activities, or they, can have parents called. But again, it depends on the seriousness of it and how often kids are bullying. The real change has to come from them if they see that they have done something that hurts someone else and maybe there was a better way to do it. It's really trying to engage their way of looking at themselves in that situation rather than just use denial, which teaches them nothing.
Now, an interesting question that I hear sometimes when talking to school administrators is what the profile of a bully is. A lot of school administrators will often quote back, there has to be sort of a disproportionate power, where, they'll often say, well, there has to be a power element where, maybe the kid who has the greater social status in school will bully the kid who doesn't.
Right.
Do you feel that that's accurate? I've seen cases where kids who are maybe sort of on the outs of the social strata will bully other kids, and it's still true bullying where harm is done or kids will start to feel uncomfortable, and the schools have trouble seeing that what they view as power is not necessarily power because they're not understanding the dynamics of what's getting created in the school?
Yeah, it's a really good question because, when I was growing up, the typical bully profile was a kid who was maybe big and overweight, who was insecure inside, who would then bully to try to, increase their self-esteem by hurting others and making kids feel bad to make themselves look better. And there's still some of those kids. Those kids are easy to identify. The more concern we have, the greater concern we have now are for the kids who are kids that we don't suspect who do bullying, like those popular kids who are on top of the social totem pole, and they can get away with a lot because they're likable, and they do it for fun, and it's a game for them, but they can still be really hurtful and bring a lot of other kids into the bullying because everyone wants to be connected to those kids. And teachers like them. And we all like them because we suspect that they're good kids. Sometimes those kids are not very different from leaders. The thing that differentiates like a leader from a bullying popular kid sometimes is just that empathy. Leadership kids are inclusive. They like to have kids around them, and they don't care if someone's less than them in some way. But bullying kids, they look for the power differences so they can feel that much more strengthened and strong and make other kids feel bad to increase their power and strength. So we are worried more about the popular bullies these days because they can do more damage.
So they really do have the sort of the social clout, and the schools may be on the lookout for them then because that's what they feel is sort of the power strata. But you could still have sort of the bottom dwellers of the social strata trying to bully the other kids. Maybe they're trying to get their voice heard, or maybe they feel one of the social kids or popular kids has done a wrong to them. I would think that any kid in the school could still become a bully.
Yeah, and that's what, you're hitting a really important point, and I'm glad you're bringing this up. I've done a lot of work in schools for the last 20 years and camps and sports teams. So what happens is when you put kids together for the first time, like the first day of school or first day of camp, kids when they come in, for example, to the classroom, what do they do the first day of school, the first 20, 30 minutes, at all ages? I mean, they go to school because they want to learn, but they're really there for the social connection. Kids actually, in their own way, divide themselves into social groupings. So every group, every classroom turns into a social group, and there's the group on top, the popular kids. There's the middle group, which accounts for about 70% of kids, and then there's that bottom group, the kids who are kind of socially not connected. Those are the kids who get targeted generally. But when the kids, are in that bottom group, it's pretty painful for them. So the 85% of kids above them, 70% in the middle, 15% on top, do everything they can to not be in that bottom group because that's the group that really no one really feels has status or power. But bullying kids can come from any one of those groups, even within that bottom group. Sometimes in that group they divide themselves into a popular bottom or a middle bottom because no one wants to be on the bottom because that's where you're most vulnerable. That's where you're most vulnerable. So social status plays a big part in bullying behavior. And kids sometimes don't join in and help others if they fear that they'll be moved to the bottom if they stand up for a bottom kid. That's the big problem we have in schools.
How do you help kids understand there was a incident recently at one of my kids' schools where no sooner did a talk on bullying happen in one of their morning sessions than a bunch of kids sort of bullied another kid. And it was almost like it fell on deaf ears. Do you see that a lot where some kids would just try something out, or maybe they'll just kind of all gang up on a kid because, they sort of think it's fun or it's cool?
Yeah,
it's
amazing. It was
odd
like
timing.
When I used to do training in schools early on in my early career, we would go into classrooms and we would, teach kids, and we would videotape them on how to be good bystanders and stand up for other kids, and we teach them the language and we teach them the behaviors. And it was like we felt so good about ourselves as trainers. But then we would watch them go out to the playground or into lunch, and all the things we taught, they wouldn't do. It was one of the most frustrating experiences we had. And we realized over time, and I realized that part of that is this issue that it's one thing to hear it, and they can perform well and act when they need to for you, but when they're in their social milieu, if they have a bullying kid who's maybe popular or above them try something out, they don't want to risk losing their status, so sometimes they'll join them. That's what happens in real life. The social pressures are really strong. And even if they've learned a lesson, many times when they're in that situation, their normal response is, I don't want to be the next kid targeted, so I'm going to just join in.
How do you undo all that? How do you rewire those kids who just, even if they have sort of this abnormal view of another kid that they can't shake, how do you redirect them just to sort of let it go and, play nice in the sandbox and just move on to, stop focusing their attention on the kid they're bugging and move on to somebody else?
You mean a bullying kid?
Yeah, because I sometimes see that there's a fine line between kids just developing a deep dislike for somebody and then bullying behavior evolves, and or kids who just don't know the difference between when they're going too far and it becomes bullying, or when they think they dislike somebody but maybe they're adopting some other kid's beliefs. It gets very complicated, especially in middle school, I think, where they become sort of these pack rats. And all of a sudden one kid will get miffed at another kid, and before you know it, especially with girls, they've got all this, 8 girls might now be miffed at the other kid, and nobody knows why. And it sort of becomes like this sort of herd mentality. And then you can get bullies forming from these nothing events because they sort of think, well, I just don't like this girl. And then they start teasing. It like becomes the Mean Girls movie, lived out in all these middle schools.
Right.
And
well,
I think
part of that
they
is,
almost
again,
learn
it's that
to
notion
do that.
of, if I'm in a pack, I'm protected. So if we pick on a weaker person, I'm still in the strong group, which is why that stuff happens. Even if they don't necessarily want to behave that way or they don't feel good, it's part of the social connectedness they feel. That's a problem. So, look, we try to do a lot of education in schools. We try to get groups of girls together and talk to them about, dealing with each other directly. That's why, schools are having to take much more education line now to kind of really talk about bullying, what it is and what it isn't. And that's probably, some of the biggest problems we face are, school teachers or aides don't necessarily use the same definition of what bullying is in school. So schools have to define what bullying is, the behaviors that go with that, and then really help kids at all ages define appropriate behavior and then what's not appropriate, which are the bullying behaviors, which are hurtful to others. But then they have to teach kids to also report what's going on in confidential ways, and school has to be open to the confidentiality side again, so kids are safe to let adults know when things are not going right, or kids will never get involved in that. So schools need to jump on board with that.
No, I would imagine that can go well and also go very poorly. I've heard of times where some schools will handle it great and let kids go and report regardless of the situation. I've also heard times where kids will try to report and get told, go back to lunch or go back to recess. It's kid stuff. Work it out yourself.
Well, look, in reality, 90% of kids can work out a lot of the small issues of bullying that happen to them or that they even do without realizing it, because most kids read cues with each other, and when they see that they cross the line, they kind of back off and they realize that they went too far because they're not intentionally looking to hurt someone. But 10% of kids, 10 to 12% of kids do bad stuff that create 90% of our bullying problems. We need to put our resources on those kids who are doing the bad stuff and, the targets who really don't have the skill sets to manage it too. Like, I'm also a believer that, besides teaching bullying kids skills to reflect, targeted kids also need skills to try to help them deal with this stuff. I spent a lot of time in my office teaching kids how to deflect and how to deal with bullying that they get, because sometimes their reaction to the bullying actually puts them in a worse position. I'm not saying that they're responsible, but they need to learn how to deal with it so they can be most effective. Because lots of times kids who are in those situations may make it worse by their reaction, because kids who bully sometimes look for the emotional reaction of the kid they're targeting to see that they're getting to them. That's what gives the bully status and power. So if we can teach a targeted kid to deflect it in a way that doesn't make it more fun for a bullying kid, that can also sometimes be really helpful for a kid who can learn those skills.
So you just said two incredibly reassuring things. One is that the vast majority of kids who get bullied handle it themselves just fine, so that tells us our kids are an incredibly hardy bunch overall, and that by teaching kids some very simple deflection techniques, they can diffuse this without it becoming a big to-do. So it sounds like that's a strategy parents and teachers have to focus on without getting our kids riled up, teaching them proper ways of addressing the bullies, trying to stay calm and maybe not, it's so easy to want to, shoot from the hip and say something back, but we all know that that's the wrong thing to do.
It's totally right. And, in my book, Bully Proof Your Child for Life, I talk about all those ways, but just quickly, what happens is that when kids are targeted, it's really easy, it'd be easy for any of us to get emotional about it and angry or upset. But that's what makes the bullying dynamic fun for the kids doing it. So we really try to teach kids who are in those positions to kind of look at them strongly, stand up to them, and just go, so, or whatever. Almost look at them like they got the problem, and not to give them material or emotions or anger or distress that makes that game fun. Because bullying for many kids is really a game. It's that power game. So the more skills that schools use to teach kids, the better they are also in terms of helping kids feel better about themselves. If kids learn how to deflect this, think about their self-esteem. Targeted kids who can learn to deflect this stuff feel pretty good about themselves when they feel powerful. They feel like they're not on the bottom anymore. So
take the air right out of the balloon.
What's exactly right, and that's so important. I'm always a believer in skill teaching. So teaching kids skills to do this creates self-esteem, because then they see that they've been in a bad spot, but they found a way out of that bad spot. That's really where true self-esteem comes from. So I'm not a believer always in telling adults when you're in a school from elementary to middle school. My belief is, you teach kids skills. If they can do it, great. If they can't do it, then we move to the next level of getting adults involved. Unless the bullying is severe, then adults need to know, parents or school professionals. But when kids can learn to deal with this themselves, that's a home run.
Well, let me ask you this. If the bullying goes online, what's your advice to a middle schooler to diffuse it? Because they often feel the need to text back or email back or Facebook back, and I think that certainly feeds the cycle more, and then you get the total escalation of the online-offline cycle, and that seems to be a big component of today's bullying situations, at least the ones that happen in middle school and high school. How can kids handle that when one of these offline moments becomes also having an online factor?
Yeah, I have to say I'm dealing with so much cyberbullying material now because of this change in the venue, because kids are communicating so much more online, through phones and, their computers. But in fact, the dynamics of bullying are not so different online, meaning that a cyberbully really wants attention too, and they crave attention. So teaching kids not to react to that at all is actually pretty helpful. Sometimes kids will escalate, these cyberbullies will escalate to try to get a reaction, especially if they think kids react in person. A lot of times cyberbullies are doing other bullying in school, but not reacting is really helpful. So preserve evidence, try to figure out who it is. Don't give them excitement. Don't give them the attention they want. Don't make it fun for them. And that can be actually very helpful. You still can print off material if there's something that you can get that you can print for evidence if you need to take it to an authority. But it's the emotional reaction that makes cyberbullying fun, like any other kind of bullying for the perpetrator, because they get the reaction they want.
For most bullying, you're always going to get the rare bully that escalates no matter what. But for most bullies, if you don't make it fun, you stop reacting to the texts, to the emails, to the, lunchroom taunts. Do most bullies just lose interest and move on?
Yeah, in many ways they do, because again, most of the dynamics, unless a bullying kid has really got significant pathology, they're looking for the game in it, the fun, the power high, getting other kids involved. It's a game. It's what they do. So if you don't make it fun, a lot of times these games go away. But then sometimes you get the real bad kids who do horrible things and tease and taunt, like that terrible, Massachusetts thing. There's a lot of times where these things cross the line, or you hit a kid who's so vulnerable that they can't cope, and then it becomes a nightmare in the suicides we've been seeing. But those situations still are relatively small compared to the number of bullying incidents we see around the country. But it's really about trying, if you can, to reduce it yourself, and if not, trying to find trusting adults who can help you in ways that won't expose you so you feel safe to report, so you feel like you're not alone in that. Because the aloneness and isolation can be really tough for a target.
What are the signs of pathology in a potentially bad bully that parents and kids can, parents and school teachers and administrators can be on the lookout where maybe it won't be a situation that'll calm down with some of these things, and they might want to up the ante on intervening early. Are there some, or is it more of a pattern of behavior over time?
Yeah, it's really, well, the things we look for really are the pattern of behavior. If you get a bullying kid and you found out that he's been doing bullying, he or she, and then you kind of talk to them, you give them consequences, you try to involve their parents in this, and the bullying continues and continues, and they're not responsive to anything, then, we worry more about what's really that about. So those kids may need more intervention. I mean, sometimes kids do not respond to any adult authority. That's a problem. But if someone's really causing damage in a school, it is important for the school to kind of step up, identify those kids who are not listening or not responding to the consequences given, and put, in my mind, it's helpful for schools to put more attention on those kids so they're watched more. And if not, maybe that's not the right place for them. If their behavior problems are so significant that they create disruption for others, schools can take that step to try to get them evaluated and removed if, in fact, they're not responding to the kind of things they're doing in the school.
Before you called in, I was commenting that one of my biggest pet peeves lately is I don't see schools, at least in Massachusetts, from some of the message boards and comments that have been left since that girl Phoebe killed herself. Schools don't always want to step up, and one of the issues I'm hearing a lot of is schools don't want to label kids as bullies or even use the word bullying. Have you come across that?
Yeah, I think the word is kind of like a scary term. But you know what? People throwing around words like harassment now, like the legal terms, there's not a lot, the laws are not great yet on this bullying stuff. Schools are being mandated to come up with things in some ways, but laws are slow to come. And, bullying, it's kind of like it's a descriptor, but really it's about behavior. And kids who are making other kids' lives miserable through their harassment or their physical bullying or cyber harassment in ways are actually making other kids feel bad. And if that behavior continues, we have to look at their behaviors. And if it's happening in a school, those are reasonable things to work on. The bullies need to kind of be, or the bullying kids, if they're using bullying behavior, and again, I'm labeling here too, but kids who are using that behavior really do need some intervention so they can see that their behavior is inappropriate for the rules. Because they may not be getting that at home or it may not be working. And then that needs to be brought further until that kid sees what they're doing. Schools are reluctant because they're also afraid of lawsuits and other things.
I would think instead of getting caught up in which kid has the position of power and because schools seem to think they need that to make it bullying, that they should look at whether there's dysfunction involved, because true teasing, the child being teased doesn't go on and sort of perseverate or go on to have health consequences or have grades decline and all those things that, as health practitioners we worry about with bullying. But with bullying there are domains of health functioning and social functioning and developmental issues that sort of start unraveling.
Well,
and
I think we're talking about chronicity, the length of time and maybe the severity. But teasing for some kids, where the teasing is felt to be mean and hurtful, can feel as bad or worse than physical bullying. So it depends a lot on the kid's reaction, too. Some kids can't handle that level. And again, 90% of kids will read the social cues on some kids. If they're good kids and they see they cross the line, the kid's upset about their teasing, well, back off. It's the kids who see that see that situation as an opportunity to hurt others, are the kids we worry about. Those are the bullying kids who need alternatives or need to be given a challenge in school by saying, look, you may have good skills, but when you make these kids feel bad, you are doing something that goes against our school rules, and we're giving you a challenge to change that behavior. Is that something you can kind of manage here? We're going to teach you what we want you to do to try to be nice, to be kind, to be even ignore others that you don't like, but can you step up to that challenge? And those kids need to be put to the test, which is reasonable. It's a skill set.
So, in a way, a bully goes back for more. They get a charge out of it.
They like it. They get high on it. It's a power rush. That's what gives them a thrill. And there are studies, actually. There was one study a couple years back, did PET scans. It was not a great study, but it did show that, there's excitement that kids who bully feel. And, their brain lights up around this. So we need to kind of try to find ways for those kids to understand that behavior isn't going to fly in our, in our school system.
How much more at risk is a kid who has been badly bullied to become a bully, him or herself?
Well, kids who are bullied many times do try out bullying on kids who are weaker than them, so because that's what they're exposed to a lot. That doesn't mean they want to do it, but maybe they feel a little elevated if they can feel a little more powerful. But what we worry most about with kids who are targeted is not that they're going to be severe bullies. They may try it out, that behavior again, but we worry about their depression, anxiety, like you said, somatic concerns, whether or not they can even pay attention in school and get the most out of their experience. Because they may be so distressed about the bullying that's coming towards them that they can't pay attention to what they're there in school for, which is to get the most out of their school situation. So those kids are pretty vulnerable. And we need to really, if we can, pay attention to those kids too and give them alternatives to, the social stuff that may be happening to them. My big thing is put aides or put people in the school, just watch those kids in the unstructured situations to make sure they're not getting tormented during the school day, which can be really helpful.
The one part of this we haven't talked about yet are the parents. I know it's always a big dilemma. Should parents call the parents of the other kids? So if you find out your child has been teased or bullied, however you want to phrase it in a situation, your kid comes home and tells you about an incident with another child, should parents call the other parent, or is it best to just let the schools handle it if it happened in school?
Yeah, I'm pretty, through experience, I can tell you what my 99% response is, which is don't get involved with another parent. Because the risk is that if you do, you don't know what that parent's going to tell their kid, and the way they tell their kid, that kid might get more incited and more upset and actually pick on your kid worse. The only time I say it's okay is if you know that parent really, really well, and they're close enough that you can call them and say, look, we had this incident, I need your help, let's try to figure this out. And you trust that they will stay on their kid enough that if these situations arise again, you'll deal with it again. But that's a risky thing. If you let the schools handle it, you keep yourself out of that loop where you're ratting on your kid, which is the risk there.
Yeah, I have to tell you that's my experience too. And even in times I've known the parent, I haven't ever found it's gone well to try to talk to another parent about their child. I think it's sticky at best.
It's very sticky, and I rarely tell a parent to do that.
If you find out your child is a bully, that's the flip side of this. What if your child is bullying other kids? How do you handle that?
Well, yeah, it's a great question, and it's not a simple answer, but part of it is, sometimes we have to look at our behavior as parents first. Like, are we showing our kids bullying behavior? Something I like to do when I do a lot of presentations, which I do a lot of speaking, is I'll ask parents to think about, like, when they have conflict with their partner, their spouses, is there always a winner and a loser in the conflicts, and is that always the same person? Is the winner always the same? Is the loser always the same? Are kids modeling, powerful situations at home with one parent always winning and one losing? And we have to think about ourselves and our roles and how we handle conflicts and other people. Do we do a lot of gossiping ourselves? Are we role modeling the kind of bullying behaviors that we see in our kids? We can save that for another discussion someday, because that'll take a long time. But then you have to figure out if your kid is doing bullying behavior. First of all, how do you find out about it? And if you do find out that they're hurting others, it's really kind of having the tough talk about, like, what their behavior is about. What are they trying to get out of it? What's going on with it? Where do they learn that from? Are they watching too much violent TV? Are they involved in doing things that they're getting attention for negative, nasty behavior? And then work on alternatives for that. But you have to be a parent willing to deal with that with your kid. That's not sometimes so easy to do, because a lot of parents sometimes can't believe that their kid would do that kind of behavior. But kids will try it out. It's what they do when they are called out on their behavior. The kids who continue have the bigger problems, and then they may need more professional help to learn skills or learn ways to kind of modify that. Because kids who do bullying behavior do it for all kinds of reasons. If it's a social thing, then we have to work on other ways to get social attention. But if they realize that they're hurting others, where's their empathy? Are they using it at all? Do they recognize that they're hurting others, or is it a social thing for them? Is it a social game? So there are lots of reasons kids can bully. Those discussions have to be kind of managed by the parents, if parents are willing to have them with their kids.
Yeah, it's definitely, that would be definitely a great show for another time, sort of an apple doesn't fall too far from the tree kind of show, because it is true.
It's so big, and role modeling of this behavior is huge. I have done a lot of studies on parents, and I have a lot of data on parents and their behavior. Parents rarely think of those behaviors themselves as bullying, And when you open their eyes, they're like, whoa, I didn't even think about that, right? So if we don't look at our own behaviors as bullying, especially when we're speaking meanly about others or trying to hurt others or leaving others out and excluding them, where do kids learn from? They're not going to see that their behavior has anything wrong. If there's anything wrong with their behavior if, in fact, they see their parents doing the same thing.
Oh, it's true. There's, been a lot of talk about whether this culture of parents has become, and I guess we have to include ourselves in that. We're part of the same, generation. There's something going on out there where parents aren't necessarily being nice to each other, and there's a lot written on blogs about it. And I think when you take a step back and you look at it, there's not a single parent that hasn't fallen into that trap of maybe not being so nice to another parent or giving people empathy, and there's so much speculation on why this generation of parents raising today's kids has sort of that's been triggered, and there's a lot of blog posts on why can't we be nice to one another, we're all raising kids in today's culture, but it does seem to trigger something in kids that we all have to own, And
we do, and I think that's seriously, it's worth another show. It'd be great.
I agree, because I think we all have to look in the mirror sometimes and go, oh my, it's like your kid repeating back that phrase that you didn't want them to hear, and it's like, oh my God, my daughter's becoming me. Or when you have that revelation, you're becoming your own mother or father, and it's like, ugh. So yeah, we should definitely do a follow-up show on that, because it is part of today's society. We all have to own our behaviors that our kids inherit from us, and it's challenging when you realize that we all have good points and bad points. But I do think today's parenting culture is intense, and it's created, I think it's raised the bar high in kids and maybe created some behaviors as a result of it. And whether bullying is part of that, I've always wondered, because it certainly puts some kids on edge, that's for sure.
Well, we've always seen bullying behavior, and it's been around a long time, but I think that the parenting culture we see now and the changes we've seen, and I've seen across the country as I speak, really we've seen lots of changes in our culture, which we can talk about again, but I think it has raised the bar and made bullying that much more prevalent, in addition to the internet and media and all those things. But the changes in parenting do reflect some real changes in kids' behavior and their own beliefs about what's okay and what's not. So that would be productive for us. I'm happy to do that again with you at some point.
Yeah, definitely. I think that might even make a great show before the end of the school year or in the fall for, to help parents understand, how we all interact with, each other and our kids. I know people are starting to become aware of this, and it's kind of like right on the edge as people are starting to talk more about bullying. And so it's a good time for a discussion like that. So we've already been on the phone for 45 minutes. I know that's getting to be a long time. What would be your best advice to people for, your kid comes to you and you've looked into it, the school agrees that the situation, whether they want to label it as bullying or not, is certainly inappropriate, and your child seems to be sort of competent, but, sort of your garden variety situation, but needing a little bit of help. Is there a time you ever need to get the police involved in these situations, or are there warning signs people should be looking out for?
Well, the warning signs really have to do with, knowing your kid and knowing when there's a huge change in their behavior, where they're cutting off from social things they like to do, sports things they like to do, even being online if they like to do that. When there's a real decrease in that behavior and they're avoiding something that's common for them, you want to put your radar up. But, the key thing is being able to talk to your kids in a calm, relaxed way, even about these situations, so they're not threatened by you and your emotional response. Because sometimes bad stuff can be happening, but kids are afraid to tell you because they're humiliated, embarrassed, or even afraid of how you're going to react. So if you can find out what's going on, you first always try to talk to your kid about what they need to do, what they want to do, and then maybe approach the school confidentially. But if things really continue and things are not being managed by the school over and over and over again, lots of parents are taking that step to contact law enforcement if they feel like the school isn't doing the right job. I tell parents, don't do that unless the school really has not fulfilled their responsibility and you've documented a lot of what's happened. But law enforcement is a possibility when things aren't working. But try every step-wise along the way before you hit that step. Unless
so make it a real last resort.
For safety.
Yeah, so I would think safety should be maybe the line crossed there. You're worried about your child's physical safety, maybe maybe a physical threat has been made, that
threats
kind
are different. If you're worried that something harmful will happen to your kid, that's scary enough to contact the school and even the police if you'd like to. Because threatening behavior like that, you can't take a chance of letting that go. That's not an escalation of behavior. That's a real threat to harm. When there's a threat of harm, I would contact law enforcement too. But always contact the school too and let them know what's going on.
If and a related question is, would kids use strong language all the time? So I've heard kids say, "Oh, I hate her, I hate him,"
Yep.
That kid's no longer my friend. If I would imagine it's pretty typical for a kid to say, "Well, I just hate him, I just hate her." Is that normal in a bullying situation for the bully just to say, "Well, I just hate that person," and to not worry so much about that?
Bullies will come up with all kinds of things to say to justify their behavior, right? But that doesn't mean anything. Like, when people get mad, they can say, "I hate you." Doesn't mean they really do. But bullies don't necessarily even hate those kids. They just justify their behavior of having fun at someone else's expense because they want to be mean to increase their power. So that word doesn't necessarily trigger something for me. It's the continued behavior and how severe they're behaving that draws the line. If someone's really putting a kid at risk and harm, that's a whole different ballgame. I'd be worried about that kid actually doing something. That's when I would get more involved with the school and maybe law enforcement.
You just look for other things. Is the kid upping the ante, doing other...
And we're not even being responsive to the things you're talking to the kid about. And is the kid continuing to do behavior that is escalating and getting more risk-taking in their efforts to harm someone else or be hurtful? That's a worrisome situation. Then more intervention needs to be, implemented.
That's great advice. You just want to look for the pattern over time, the kid not letting it go, and then just keep on the school.
You got it.
Well, thank you, Joel. This was a very illuminating discussion, and you and I can talk offline about doing a Apple Doesn't Fall Too Far from the Tree show, which I think will definitely be a worthwhile topic.
I'm with you. I think that'd be great. I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, I think so too. Well,
thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it. It was great.
Well, thank you very much, and I will keep your book on my website and the show page. And if you want to go out and give the book a plug for everybody, go right ahead.
Yeah, it's called Bully Proof Your Child for Life. Protect your child from teasing, taunting, and bullying for good. It's put out by Penguin/Perigee. But it actually has a lot of practical information, which is why it's been so successful. It's really a how to manage bullying in school, camps, sports, wherever, and even in your family if it happens. So I hope that's helpful. And my website... People can get it anywhere? Amazon, Barnes & Noble, it's just sold at any bookstore? Pretty much. I mean, bookstores either carry it or they can get it for you if it's not in their warehouse. Amazon, always easy. As Barnes & Noble, same thing. Or they can go to your website and click the link. Absolutely. That's fine, too. Awesome. All right, thank you. I really appreciate it. Coming on. We'll talk to you soon. All right, I'll talk soon, and I'll be connecting with you soon. Okay. Thank you. Well, that was a great discussion with Dr. Joel Haber. And next week's show is going to be on Friday. We're going back to Fridays on April 9th at noontime when we're going to wrap up the Bullies in Your Backyard series at noon with Stephen Balcom from the Family Online Safety Institute to talk about digital citizenship. You may be wondering what digital citizenship has to do about bullying. Well, it launches from what we were just talking about with Dr. Haber about the fact that, the idea is to try to, we're talking about bringing kids into a point of awareness with their behavior. Next week, we're going to refocus the entire discussion away from the badness that kids are doing to each other and really talking about the good of the online world and moving it into a direction of how can we help our kids be good online citizens and how can we just engage them in a forward direction of just an awareness of the world we live in today and where we are actually heading into the future. If we develop that awareness, Stephen and I actually share a belief that that'll be helpful for our kids in treating each other well on and offline, and that is one of the necessary factors in helping kids develop an awareness to not bully. So while it's not a direct how do you stop bullying, it is indirectly because it's a necessary skill for today's life. So I thought it was a wonderful way to wrap up this
series for the time being because it will end it on a more positive light with helping us develop some skills for our kids that are necessary for just negotiating today's world and being good digital citizens, which helps them treat each other a little bit better. And as Dr. Haber and I were just mentioning, this is a little bit about an apple doesn't fall too far from the tree perspective in that we may be teaching our kids some things that we don't want them to. So if your child is bullying, are you teaching them that? If your child is being bullied, are we teaching them to respond to people in a way that's attracting that? You know, we would never want to suggest that our kids are being bullied and asking for it, but we do teach our kids a lot from our own behaviors of how to be good to people, how to apologize. I will toss out that one big pet peeve I have is that kids have to own their behavior, and that if they treat somebody poorly, they should apologize. And well before, it doesn't even have to be bullying. I'm talking about basic behavior. I don't see enough apologies going on in the world in general. And one of my big pet peeves is that when my kids do something where they hurt somebody else, a friend, for example, they work hard to try to apologize because it may be an inadvertent hurt. They may have just said something or done something that they didn't realize was hurtful to somebody else. It's important to apologize and own it. I think if kids learn to do that in school, a lot of moments could be easily diffused. And that speaks to what Dr. Haber was just talking about with the, kids picking up on each other's cues when maybe gentle razzing goes too far and, kids give each other kind of a tough time being playful. Sometimes that can quickly cross over into teasing and hurt feelings and kids becoming sensitive, and kid stuff just blows up in each other's faces, and before you know it, you've got angry people and a lot of kids in tears. So if we can teach them the value of just diffusing it by, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean for it to come out that way, a lot of people will be a lot more happy at the end of the school day. So I hope you found today's discussion helpful. Dr. Haber's website is Respect You, which is, I'm clicking on it now, although it did not come up on my web page. Well, it's RespectU, RESPECTU.com. It is also on my website. If you go to drgwenisin.com, you will find the blog page, and you'll be able to get to Dr. Haber's website from there. So I will make sure that is up for you. Next week's show, again, is Friday at noon on April 9th, where we will talk more about digital citizenship. And I will leave you with one thought before we click off today. I found a really good quote that I think applies to men, women, and kids in a calendar my family gave me for the holidays. And it's just a really fun calendar. It talks about sort of a calendar for us gals, and it's really fun. And this was the thought for the day a few weeks ago. Imagine the kind of earth-shattering changes that might happen if women actually supported one another. Can you say no more glass ceiling? I'd argue that you can swap out women for kids or men or teachers or doctors or any other person that you can think of, and that quote would still apply. So on that note, have a wonderful long weekend celebrating whatever holiday you are about to celebrate. Easter, if that's what you're celebrating on Sunday. My family actually celebrates both. We're doing our Seder on Saturday with many, many relatives, and also Easter on Sunday. So it's going to be a busy cooking, celebrating, kids getting torqued up on sugar sort of weekend. And I hope you all have a wonderful weekend with your families. Hopefully there'll be no rain here in New England. And if anybody has any questions for Dr. Haber, feel free to direct message me or email me, and I'll make sure I get them to him, and I'll be happy to post anything on my blog and website for you to have the answers. So thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next week.
Let's fill the world, make it look better than this one. Light the old one up, watch it burn from a distance, a yellow flaming light. I can see in your eyes, 'cause this new world will be, it will be our biggest pride. Look up at the stars, watch them shine brighter than ever. Lie down on our backs and let us see if we could measure the space between here and the moon. This light will die out soon. Did you think that it would last forever? This world so torn, so small, in our hands it will never see the signs ahead and stop before it's dead. Forget about the past, what's done is done, and we will have to fight annihilation of this world and all existence. Was this to be our fate? For now it's too late. Did you think that it would last forever? This world so torn, so small, in our hands it will never see the signs ahead and stop before it's dead. Am I wasting my time?